When people discuss America's greatest generals of World War II, names like Dwight Eisenhower, George Patton, and Omar Bradley are often mentioned. But what if I told you that one American commander is remembered for almost the exact opposite reason? Many historians have labeled Lieutenant General Lloyd Fredendall as the worst American general of World War II. But was he truly America's worst general? Or has history judged him too harshly? Let me know what you think in the comments. Lloyd Fredendall was born in New York in 1883. Unlike many famous American commanders, he did not graduate from West Point. Instead, through determination and political connections, he eventually earned a commission in the U.S. Army. Throughout the early decades of his career, Fredendall spent most of his time in training and administrative assignments. He was known as a strict officer who followed regulations closely. However, one major problem remained. He had almost no real combat experience. Would you trust a commander with little battlefield experience to lead thousands of soldiers in a world war? As World War II expanded, the U.S. Army grew at an incredible pace. America suddenly needed large numbers of generals, and promotions came quickly. Fredendall benefited from this rapid expansion and, by 1942, found himself commanding the U.S. II Corps in North Africa. It was one of the most important commands in the entire American Army. The mission was simple to describe, but incredibly difficult to accomplish. American forces would face seasoned German veterans who had already defeated armies across Europe. Even worse, many of those German troops served under the legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox. Imagine being an inexperienced commander preparing to fight one of history's most respected battlefield leaders. How confident would you feel? Soon after arriving in Tunisia, Fredendall made a decision that stunned many officers. Rather than placing his headquarters near the fighting, where he could personally observe conditions and inspire his men, Fredendall ordered the construction of a massive underground command center nearly 70 miles behind the front lines. The headquarters was carved deep into solid rock and required enormous amounts of manpower and resources. Some officers sarcastically nicknamed it Shangri-La, suggesting that the general had built himself a comfortable sanctuary far from danger. Meanwhile, ordinary American soldiers were enduring freezing nights, enemy artillery, and constant uncertainty at the front. Do you think a commander should lead from the front, or is staying far behind the lines sometimes the smarter choice? Tell us below. Fredendall rarely visited frontline positions. Instead, he relied heavily on reports and maps. Many subordinate commanders complained that he often issued orders without understanding the actual battlefield situation. But that wasn't the only issue. Fredendall developed a strange habit of using confusing language in his orders. Instead of clearly identifying locations, he frequently invented unusual code names and complicated instructions that often left his officers completely puzzled. One frustrated officer later admitted that understanding Fredendall's orders could sometimes be harder than fighting the Germans themselves. Can you imagine being under enemy fire while trying to decipher what your own commander wants you to do? As the German threat grew, several experienced officers warned Fredendall that his troop deployments were dangerously weak. Rather than concentrating forces at key defensive positions, he scattered units across wide areas of rugged terrain. This meant that many American positions were isolated and unable to support one another quickly during an attack. Military experts repeatedly warned that this was a serious mistake. Fredendall ignored those warnings. Perhaps he believed his strategy offered flexibility. Perhaps he underestimated the Germans. Or perhaps he simply lacked battlefield experience. What do you think? Was Fredendall overconfident, inexperienced, or simply overwhelmed by the responsibility? The Germans saw something very different. They saw an opportunity. In February 1943, German forces launched a major offensive through a remote mountain corridor known as Kasserine Pass. There, the weaknesses of Lloyd Fredendall's leadership would be exposed for the entire world to see. And the result would become one of the most embarrassing defeats in American military history. February 1943. The mountains of western Tunisia stood silent as German and Italian forces prepared to strike. Hidden among the rocky valleys and narrow passes, veteran Axis soldiers waited for the perfect moment, and they knew exactly where to attack. The American lines commanded by Lloyd Fredendall were dangerously spread out. Units were positioned miles apart across difficult terrain, making mutual support almost impossible. For the Germans, this was a gift. Leading the attack was Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox. Rommel had spent years fighting in North Africa. He understood desert warfare better than almost anyone alive. Facing him were largely inexperienced American troops entering some of their first major battles. Who would you place your money on? Battle-hardened veterans or inexperienced soldiers led by an untested commander? On February 14th, Axis forces launched their offensive. German tanks smashed into American positions around Sidi Bou Zid. Almost immediately, problems emerged. Isolated American units found themselves surrounded. Communication broke down. Requests for reinforcements arrived too late or not at all. Several American commanders urgently requested permission to withdraw and regroup. Fredendall refused. Instead, he continued issuing orders from his distant headquarters, often based on incomplete or outdated information. Some officers later claimed that the general seemed unable to grasp how rapidly the battlefield situation was changing. As German armored units advanced, American resistance began collapsing. Entire formations were overrun. Tanks were abandoned. Hundreds of soldiers were captured. For many American troops, it was their first taste of modern mechanized warfare, and it was devastating. Imagine being a young American soldier facing German tanks for the first time, while your defensive positions crumble around you. How do you think you would react? The crisis worsened as Axis forces pushed toward Kasserine Pass. Kasserine was a narrow mountain pass of enormous strategic importance. If Rommel broke through, he could threaten Allied supply lines and potentially throw the entire North African campaign into chaos. American troops desperately tried to establish defensive positions, but confusion reigned. Officers received contradictory instructions. Units were shifted repeatedly. Some soldiers arrived at positions only to discover that neighboring units had already withdrawn. One officer later described the situation as complete confusion from top to bottom. Do you think even the best soldiers can succeed when leadership fails? As the Germans attacked Kasserine Pass, many American troops fought courageously despite the chaos. Small groups held their ground against overwhelming odds. Artillery crews continued firing until enemy tanks nearly reached their positions. The bravery of ordinary soldiers could not be questioned. The leadership directing them, however, could. Fredendall remained far from the battlefield inside his headquarters. Unlike generals such as Patton, who frequently visited frontline positions, Fredendall rarely exposed himself to danger. Critics later argued that he had effectively lost control of the battle. Even senior Allied commanders began losing confidence. General Dwight Eisenhower received increasingly alarming reports. So did British General Harold Alexander. Their conclusions were becoming unavoidable. Something had gone terribly wrong. Fortunately for the Allies, German forces eventually halted their advance. Exhaustion, supply problems, and fierce resistance from American and British troops prevented a complete breakthrough. Even so, the Battle of Kasserine Pass was a humiliating defeat. The United States Army suffered thousands of casualties. Large quantities of equipment were lost. More importantly, America's military leadership had been exposed as dangerously inexperienced. Yet many historians argue that Kasserine Pass provided the U.S. Army with painful but necessary lessons. After all, armies often learn more from defeat than victory. Do you agree with that statement? Can failure sometimes create future success? For Lloyd Fredendall, however, the consequences would be severe. Senior commanders had seen enough. Questions about his competence could no longer be ignored. And behind closed doors, discussions had already begun about removing him from command. Soon, one of America's highest-ranking officers would face a devastating fall from power. In the aftermath of Kasserine Pass, senior Allied commanders began conducting a hard and honest assessment of what had gone wrong. The conclusion was unavoidable. The American soldier had not failed. The leadership had. Reports from the front painted a troubling picture. Officers complained of confusing orders, poor communication, and a commander who remained far removed from the realities of the battlefield. General Dwight Eisenhower faced a difficult decision. The North African campaign was far from over, and the Allies could not afford another disaster. So what should Eisenhower do? Should he give Fredendall a second chance, or remove him immediately? What would you have done? In March 1943, Eisenhower made his choice. Lloyd Fredendall was relieved of command of the U.S. II Corps. Officially, the Army avoided publicly humiliating him. There was no dramatic court-martial, no public condemnation. Instead, Fredendall was quietly reassigned back to the United States. Taking his place was one of the Army's most aggressive and controversial commanders, General George Patton. Patton immediately transformed II Corps. He enforced strict discipline, demanded constant training, and insisted that officers lead from the front. Soldiers were ordered to wear proper uniforms, maintain equipment, and prepare for relentless combat. The change was almost immediate. Only weeks later, American forces performed far better against German troops in Tunisia. Many historians have pointed to this dramatic improvement as evidence that leadership, not the quality of American soldiers, had been the true problem all along. Do you think replacing a single commander can really change the outcome of an entire campaign? For Fredendall, however, the damage to his reputation was permanent. Although he continued serving in training assignments for the remainder of the war and eventually retired as a lieutenant general, he would never again command troops in combat. Years later, military historians would revisit his record. Their verdict was often harsh. Historian Carlo D'Este described Fredendall as one of the most incompetent senior commanders to hold high command during World War II. Others criticized his distant leadership style, poor tactical decisions, and inability to inspire confidence among his subordinates. Perhaps the most damaging criticism centered on his headquarters. Many officers never forgot that while frontline soldiers faced German artillery and tanks, their commander remained deep inside a fortified bunker dozens of miles away. Yet some historians have offered a more balanced perspective. They argue that Fredendall inherited an almost impossible situation. The American Army in North Africa was inexperienced. Many units had never faced combat before. Equipment shortages were common, and coordination between Allied forces was still developing. Could any American general have performed well under those circumstances? It's a question that continues to divide historians even today. Was Lloyd Fredendall truly America's worst general? Or was he simply an unprepared officer placed in an impossible situation during America's first major campaign against Nazi Germany? What do you think? Was history fair to Lloyd Fredendall? Or has he become a convenient scapegoat for broader failures within the U.S. Army? One thing, however, is beyond dispute. The defeat at Kasserine Pass forced the United States Army to adapt, improve, and modernize. The painful lessons learned in Tunisia helped shape the force that would later land in Normandy, liberate Western Europe, and ultimately help defeat Nazi Germany. Ironically, Lloyd Fredendall's greatest contribution to victory may have come through failure. And sometimes, history remembers failure just as powerfully as success.